Nigeria has been a big oil producer for decades now, but very little of that oil has been refined. So you have this absurd position where Nigeria pumps oil, sells it abroad, and then re-imports it in the refined products that it needs.
Yeah, greetings everyone. So today we are going to discuss a very important subject. As you have seen the video which I've just played, the Financial Times has published a video a few moments ago, and in that video, which was published, of course, is about a month ago, right? And in that video, Financial Times, it was published on August 1st, just to be precise. It titles the video, Nigeria's Struggle to Break the Oil Curse. Okay? So, in this video, what I want to do is to attempt to dispute this allegation. And here is my argument. Here's my argument. Whenever Africa has suffered from the oil curse, as they say, of course, whenever Africa has had resources and has had challenges with these resources, they have called it the resource curse. But when the United States has these resources, they don't call it a resource curse. And this narrative, as major, of course, come from the West, and the people who coined it are majorly Western thinkers and intellectuals. And of course, unfortunately, even the African intellectuals have bought into this false narrative, and they use it, and they say it is a resource curse. Now, today I don't want to dispute this with merely words, but with some evidence, and to ask a question that when it comes to Africa's resources, why call it a oil curse? Because if you say that this is an oil curse or it is a resource curse, this is a racist attempt to say that Africans don't have the capacity, they don't have the mental ability, they don't have the ability to manage their own affairs and their own resources. Actually, this is a trap even for African intellectuals who normally drive it around and push it to claim that Africa has a resource curse, and therefore this is a resource curse, is a problem, is because the continent has a lot of resources. Why don't we have that resource curse in China? And I will explain that, of course. I will explain why China doesn't have this resource curse. Okay? For the United States and Europe, that one too, I'll explain why it doesn't have this particular resource curse. All right? Now, I'm going to use a report. Okay, which was published by the United Nations in 2011. Okay, I'm going to use that report. Now, it is a report which was published in 2020. Okay, and the United Nations said that Africa could gain an extra $90 billion of its resources if those resources are not taken by certain groups of people. All right? If those resources are not taken by certain groups of people. But Africa's resources, of course, we know they are being consumed by certain groups of people. Okay? Now, in this report, the United Nations is saying, here is what the United Nations is saying. The United Nations is saying that Africa could gain up to 89, which is close to $90 billion annually, by curbing illicit financial outflows. Now, what they are not mentioning clearly in this particular report is who is taking Africa's resources. Okay, so this claim, what I'm saying, is a trap in itself. is a trap to ensnare the Africans into believing that there is something wrong with themselves. There's something wrong with the Africans from whom resources are being stolen, and there's nothing wrong on the other part of the people who are stealing these resources. Let us look at the United Nations report and what it is saying. So the United Nations report has said that every year, every single year, as you are seeing on the screen, an estimated $88.6 billion, equivalent to 3.7% of Africa's GDP, leaves the continent as illicit capital flight, according to the report. All right? I've highlighted the key points which I want to use to make. Capital flight. Now, you have to know who is the major investors in the African continent. And of course, we know the United States, we know the Chinese, we know the Europeans are all investors. But which particular which particular sectors are where that money is flowing from? Because remember, we are talking about the resource curse. We are talking about the resource curse. And I'll come back to make a conclusion on this so-called resource curse. What is called a resource curse? What is really this so-called resource curse? Is it really a resource curse? Is it a really resource curse, or is it really a resource curse? So they are saying that these outflows are nearly as much as the combined total annual inflows of official development assistance, valued at $48 billion. They are saying that Africa received about $48 billion in development assistance, of course, which we don't see where it goes. But these outflows are nearly, these outflows as much as, as the combined total of annual inflows of total development of, development assistance, which is valued at $48 billion, and the yearly foreign direct investment. The yearly foreign direct investment in the African continent is around $54 billion. That is what this report is saying. So the outflow of $89 billion is more than the development assistance and the foreign direct investment combined. So basically, the amount of money that is being stolen, because forget about illicit financial outflow. What illicit financial outflow means is basically stealing. This is the amount of money that is being stolen from Africa. And this is according to the United Nations report. Okay, they are stealing from Africa up to $90 billion. Of course, what they're calling $89 billion. Okay, but this money that is being stolen is much more than the so-called development assistance by the West, together with their foreign direct investment, together with the foreign direct investment that is coming in Africa, combined by the West and the Chinese and whoever, whether it's the is the Indians and whoever. So all of them, all the world combined, their foreign direct investment into the African continent is around $54 billion. Now, add that the development the so-called official development assistance, which we don't know where it goes and what it has built on the African continent, is $48 billion. Okay, that is what is received. That was the average between 2013 and 2015. Now, the report goes on to say that these outflows include illicit capital flight. Number one, I want you to listen carefully here. Illicit capital flight, okay? Illicit capital flight, tax and commercial practices, okay? They are saying that tax and commercial practices like misinvoicing of trade shipments and criminal activities such as illegal markets and corruption or theft. This is the activities which are involved in stealing from Africa, these so-called $90 billion every year. Now, the Pan-Africanists have estimated that the money that is being stolen from the African continent actually is more than this. Is more than $200 billion. All right, some have even estimated up to $300 billion is how much is being stolen from the African continent. All right, and of course, according to the Africa Development Bank, the report which came out recently, it is much more than that. How much is being stolen from the African continent is much more than this, what they are showing here. Okay, and we will come back to that, to the Africa Development, the report by the Africa Development Bank. Now, the activities involved in stealing from Africa, it involves capital flight, tax and commercial practices like misinvoicing, trade misinvoicing of trade shipments. Okay, and if you remember, President Magufuli, one of the activities he stopped in Tanzania that led to him being able to raise enough money to finance the projects which he took in a period of 5 years, which included the putting back of Tanzania Airways, buying the trains, the new trains which you see in Tanzania, which are the electric trains, building of a 2,000 megawatt dam. He blocked these activities. He blocked these so-called misinvoicing of trade shipments. What was discovered in Tanzania is that they used to hide the Western world. Barrick Gold, which is a Western corporation which is mining gold all over the African continent, used to hide gold into containers which are filled with sand. And they would say that these containers are filled with sand. They are sending sand. So he asked at the port, where are you taking the sand? And they checked the sand. When they checked the sand, they found that there is gold. Now, these multinational corporations like Barrick Gold, Chevron, Shell, and all of them, they were working with certain elements at the ports in Tanzania to try to steal from the African people. And so this is what is happening. So these are the criminal activities. This is the misinvoicing of trade shipments. They tell you that they are sending sand, they are taking sand, while they are taking gold is filled in those containers. And this is robbery. This is corruption, basically. Yet, we have these countries like Canada and European countries and the United States. They rank themselves at the top of the clean countries when it comes to corruption. Yet, they are stealing from Africa. I'm coming. Now, from 2000 to 2015, the total illicit capital flight from Africa amounted, from 2000 to 2015, that's a period of 15 years, the capital amount, the capital flight from Africa amounted to $836 billion. This is nearly 33%. This is nearly a third of Africa's GDP. Africa's current GDP is around $3.5 trillion. Others have said that it's around $3 trillion. But this is nearly a third of Africa's GDP. So this is how much they are stealing from Africa. Okay? So they are saying now, this is it, that the illicit financial outflows related to the export of extractive commodities, pay close attention, the illicit financial outflows related to the export of extractive commodities. Remember, we were talking about gold, which Barrick Gold and other corporations are stealing from Tanzania, which President Magufuli blocked. This is the extractive industry that we are talking about. The IFF, the illicit financial outflows related to the export of extractive commodities. We are talking about gold. We are talking about bauxite. We are talking about iron ore. We are talking about tantalum. We are talking about all these resources. The illicit financial outflows related to the export of extractive commodities was to the figure of $40 billion in 2015. And they are the largest component of illicit capital flight from Africa. And this is basically even not capital flight. This is robbery. Okay? Although estimates of illicit financial outflows are large, they likely understate the problem and its impact. So basically what they are saying, again, the same report, is that this is even an understatement of what is being stolen from African countries. This is an understatement of what is being stolen from Africa when it comes to resources. All right. Now, let me go down a little bit. This is very important. Of the estimated $40 billion of illicit financial outflows derived from the extractive commodities in 2015, 77% were concentrated in the gold supply chain, followed by diamonds and platinum. Now, when we look at countries like Ghana, why they are suffering, Ghana, one of the industries which are leading in the export and which are supporting the economy, the leading export commodities of the country is gold, oil, and cocoa. Now, gold is at the top there. Okay, now what they are saying is that out of the $40 billion of illicit outflows from extractive industry, 77% were concentrated in gold supply chain. And we know that Nigeria, we know that all these African countries, and including South Africa is one of the leading exporters of gold. And all the other African countries where almost the gold industry is informal, this is the extraction. But remember, this is an understatement. The report, this is what they claim, that the report aims to equip African governments with knowledge on how to identify and evaluate risks associated with illicit financial outflows, as well as solutions to curb these illicit financial outflows. Okay, this is what they are saying. This is what they claim. That is why they made this report, so that Africa can be able to combat these illicit financial outflows and direct the proceeds towards the achievement of national priorities and the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, by the United Nations. It calls for global efforts to promote international cooperation to combat illicit financial outflows, and it also advocates for the strengthening of good practices on the return of assets to foster sustainable development and the achievement of the 2030 agenda for the sustainable development. Now, of course, we know that the United Nations is a hypocrite, is hypocritical. We know that the United Nations has been involved in plundering resources in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We know this. We have seen vehicles of the United Nations going about, falling even while plundering resources from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the tantalum. A vehicle by the United Nations fell when it was plundering gold and other resources like tantalum. Okay, and the bags fell out of the vehicle, and this was a shame. Of course, the United Nations never spoke about it, but of course, here is the United Nations, the same institution. It is the one which is talking about curbing the financial outflow. Now, there's something here which I have to talk about briefly also that is very important. This is something that is very important. Now, when the United Nations says, as it says, that the report aims to equip African governments with knowledge on how to identify and evaluate risks associated with illicit financial outflow, do African countries have this capacity? That is the question that we should ask ourselves. That the report, it wants to equip African governments with knowledge on how to identify and evaluate the risks associated with illicit financial outflow, as well as the solutions to curb these illicit financial outflows, and direct the proceeds towards the achievement of national priorities and the sustainable development goals. But do African countries really have the capacity to curb these illicit financial outflows? And the answer is simple. They don't. Why don't they? Because we are living in a European dispensation. We are living in a neo-colonial dispensation. You have had the West clinging on to the system which they control, whether you're talking about financial system. They set the prices of our commodities, whether it is gold, whether it is platinum, whether it is oil. They set the prices of these commodities. All right? And they are clinging on to this system. They don't want it reformed. All right? They do not want this system killed. That is why they are coming up against China. That is why they are coming up against Russia, because they feel that this system is being killed. A new system is being birthed, which will bring forth a multipolar world. They want to retain a system which exploits the rest of the world, including the global south. All right? And yet here we are with the United Nations report claiming that it wants to equip Africa with the tools to fight against these illicit financial outflow. And who is carrying out the illicit financial outflow? Of course, we have seen that is the extractive industry. Extractive industry, this includes oil. This includes oil. All right? Includes oil resources. So, basically, what these people are calling a resource curse is not a resource curse. This is an imperialist neo-colonial exploitation curse. This is basically what it is. Okay? This is an imperialist exploitation curse. Okay? It is not a resource curse per se, but rather an imperialist exploitation curse. That is basically what we are going through. Okay? So we are not going through a resource curse, again, as they are saying, but rather we are going through an imperialist exploitation curse. And this too has to be clear. All of us have to understand this, especially we, the Africans. We have to understand this, that it is not a resource curse. And to our African intellectuals who claim that this is a resource curse, it is not a resource curse. It is exploitation. And we are going to continue to show you this, why this is not a resource curse, but an imperialist exploitation curse. This is neo-colonial exploitation curse. And there's no resource curse that we have to deal with. What is there is imperialist exploitation curse. That is what we have to deal with and remove. And then Africa will retain its resources, just like what Magufuli did. Now, coming to the issue of institutions, whether Africa has the institutions to combat this so-called outflow, illicit financial outflow, or which is robbery, the stealing of Africa's resources. Nkrumah pointed out this clearly. Nkrumah said that Africa is too weak. It does not have the capacity in the individual countries. It does not have the capacity to combat this system. Because remember, they built a system. A few days ago, Jimmy Diamond, who's going to visit Africa, who's the CEO or the president of JP Morgan, he was doing an interview and he said that the West is facing a challenge, that the world order, which was built by the West in 1945, is being challenged. And when they say challenged, what do you think these guys basically mean? What do you think these guys basically mean? They basically mean that the system that has fed us for a long time and we have used to exploit others is being challenged now. The people are challenging the system that we have been using to exploit them. Okay? So they don't want this system to die. So this again tells you that this is not a resource curse. It is an imperialist exploitation curse. And so these lies, which these institutions are collaborating to spread, institutions including Financial Times, Bloomberg, and all these, and their intellectual bodies, to claim that in Africa it is a resource curse. Why is it not a resource curse when it comes to Norway, which is pumping out oil and becoming rich and using the oil to drive electric vehicles? And no one is talking about Norway, the fact that it is still pumping out oil, but they're telling Africa should not pump its oil. Okay? They are saying that the report also calls for global efforts to promote international cooperation to combat illicit financial outflows. So why don't this report write to the United States? Why the United Nations not write to the United States and all these institutions which are stealing from Africa and these organizations and tell them that they should stop? Because we know them. We know Chevron. We know ExxonMobil. We know these institutions which are stealing from Africa. Why not write to them as the United Nations and tell them that this is unacceptable what you guys are doing. The ones, Barrick Gold, Newmont, all these companies and financial institutions which are on the continent and aiding the shifting of these so-called profits, why are we not questioning them and writing to them as the United Nations and telling them that it should stop? Why? It's because the United Nations itself is a beneficiary of this system of robbery. So the West has to quit calling this a resource curse and call it a neo-colonial exploitation curse. This is what it is. Okay? They said, again, that the report also advocates for strengthening good practices on the return of assets to foster sustainable development. Now, talking about the return of assets, President Buhari went to Britain to ask Cameroon, the Prime Minister then of Britain, that they should return the $11 billion which the Sani Abacha regime, Sani Abacha, took from Nigeria and hid it in Britain. Now, when he reached Britain, David Cameron, laughed at him and he made a statement that the Nigerians are fantastically corrupt. This is what he said, fantastically corrupt. But this man who's not corrupt was refusing, he refused up to now, they refused to return the money which was stolen from Nigeria. They refused completely. Okay? So the report they are saying also highlights the importance of collecting more and better data, trade data, to detect risks related to illicit financial outflows. Now, this again points to the fact that Africa does not have, this institution does not have the capacity. Now, Nkrumah said that the capitalist system is so complicated a system for newly independent African states to deal with it. They cannot independently. Individual African countries do not have the capacity to deal with the imperialist system. They do not. So this needs to be clearly understood, that African countries do not have the capacity to deal and combat the imperialist system. And this should be understood very well. And the only way we can do it, as Nkrumah prescribed, is the unification of Africa into a single state. That is when we can combat these multinational corporations and their masters, the governments in the West, which are helping them to steal Africa's resources. Right now, the United States has taken copper already from the Democratic Republic of Congo all the way to Baltimore, the first shipment, using the railway platform which they are claiming that they are building for Africa. And they are using it to plunder copper from the African continent. The first shipment was taken to Baltimore from the Democratic Republic of Congo a few weeks ago. You can Google this and see it for yourself. And we are talking about illicit financial outflows. Remember, the report said that this illicit financial outflow is majorly concentrated in the extractive industry. Copper is an extractive industry. When we look at reports in Zambia, Glencore, in the Mopani copper mine, they don't pay taxes. A documentary was done on this about 10 years ago, 10 to 14 years ago. How this Glencore, a Swiss company, is extracting value from the African people. And in this case, of course, it is not only the imperialists to blame. It is also the African heads of state to blame, due to failure to unify the continent and strengthening it. Okay, and of course, some of them, we know that they are puppets. We know that on one hand, imperialism is interfering on a puppet, on the continent, and planting its puppets on the continent so that they can do the bidding of the multinational corporations. We know this. They spoke about, of course, tax evasion. Tax evasion is also at the core of the world's shadow financial system. This is the financial system which the West is trying to protect, that it should not be upset. Tax evasion is at the core of the world's shadow financial system. This is the system they are fighting, that no one should change. This is the system that Jimmy Dimon, okay, the CEO or the chairman of JP Morgan, is saying that the West is facing danger because the system is being destabilized. This is the system. So it is not illicit financial outflow. It is robbery, and it is neo-colonial and imperialist curse. it is not a resource curse, if I may repeat, it is imperialistic curse that is hovering over the African people. So President Buhari said that illicit flows are multidimensional and transnational in character. Like the concept of migration, they have countries of origin and destination, and there are, and of course we know that these weak politicians on the African continent, they don't want to address the real issue. They want to sugarcoat what is happening. We know this. We know that the weak politicians on the African continent, they want to sugarcoat the problem. Always. Always, they want to sugarcoat the problem. They don't want to tell the truth. And that is what Buhari is saying. It is multidimensional. And of course, multidimensional is what Nkrumah was talking about. That the system is so complicated. The capitalist system is so complicated for newly independent African states to deal with it. He's talking about the institutions which have been built by the West, the military, the media which blackmails Africa, and the plundering by these multinational corporations, the US military which is hovering all over the African continent and roaming all over the African continent, the intelligence agencies. This is what Nkrumah is talking about. The system is too complicated for newly independent African states. And this is what has held Africa back. So the report claims that African countries need to strengthen engagement in international tax reform. How can we engage in international reform? So it's just basically what they are saying. If they are telling you that as Africa, we should engage in international tax reform, what they are telling us is that we should forget about it. Because how long has it taken for the United Nations even to accept, for these superpowers like the United States to accept that Africa should be part of the Security Council, to be represented with permanent seats at the Security Council? It's taken 60 years. Nkrumah started asking for seats for Africa at the United Nations Security Council. 60 years. It's taken 60 years. And it is now that they are saying that Africa should have seats as permanent members on the Security Council. But even with that, they say that Africa would not have the veto powers, which makes it useless. Again, it's nonsense if there's no, veto powers. So the same people are telling us that Africa should strengthen its engagement in international tax reform and make tax competition consistent with protocols of the AFCFTA. So basically what they are saying is that forget about it. Nothing is going to be done about this particular issue. Therefore, you Africans, forget about this. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for you on your side. So, and this is basically what Nkrumah meant when he said that this system is so complicated for newly independent states to deal with it without unifying, without forming a united African state to combat this illicit financial outflow. Okay, so Africa then has to face the issue. Africa has to face the issue of unifying the continent immediately. Now, moving on from that, we go to a case, another case, which points out to you that this is not a resource curse. Africa does not have a resource curse. And to claim that Africa has a resource curse is a racist argument, whether it is done by Financial Times, whether it is done by Harvard, whether it is done by some of the notable and most advanced Western institutions. It is racist and it is dangerous, and it is very dangerous and much more dangerous if African intellectuals repeat this false narrative. It does not exist. There is no resource curse. There is imperialist curse. That is what we have. Imperialism. Okay? Neo-colonial curse. And when we defeat imperialism, that is when we will stop having these resource outflows, when Africa's resources will be retained and used for the benefit of the African people. Let us go to one article which was published in 2013. 2013, April 4th, 2013. It says that Uganda wins. Of course, Reuters is an imperialist organization, is an imperialist news platform. And it says that Uganda wins the tax dispute against Heritage Oil. But it happened. Of course, Uganda won the case. Uganda won the case. Now, what are they saying? That Jersey-based Heritage Oil. We know that Jersey is a British island, which is a tax haven. So Jersey is where Heritage Oil is registered. Heritage Oil played a major role in the Ugandan oil industry, actually, but it sold its assets to Talo later on, okay, which Talo, of course, it also went in and reduced this. So Heritage Oil played a major role. Now, when it was selling its concessions to Talo, Heritage Oil did not want to pay taxes of up to $434 million from the sale of its assets to British Explorer. And this is where it is. Uganda said Heritage was liable for capital gains tax payment of $434 million from the sale of its Ugandan assets to British Explorer Talo Oil in a $1.45 billion deal. Okay, so they did not want to pay taxes on this money. And this is what we call illicit financial outflow. This is basically what we call illicit financial outflow. They are stealing from what is supposed to be ours. And like we said with the Magufuli case, that Magufuli had to block them. And Magufuli knew that they would come and take him out. And he used to mention it, that he has touched where these guys, they don't want to be touched. They are stealing and they are claiming that it is a resource curse. It is not a resource curse. This is an imperialist exploitation curse. Okay, and this is how Uganda also caught Heritage Oil. These are listed on stock exchanges, or London stock exchanges. So even what they are saying is that the Jersey-based Heritage Oil, at an arbitration hearing in London, a senior Ugandan official said on Thursday that Uganda won a tax dispute against Heritage Oil. Okay? So Uganda said Heritage Oil was liable to capital gains tax of $434 million from the sale of its Ugandan assets. So what, in their racist outlook, in the racist outlook of the Western world, Heritage Oil was claiming that when they sell these assets of $1.4 billion, Uganda has no right to tax Heritage Oil. This is the racist, argument which they were bringing, and Uganda said no. The Uganda Revenue Authority said no. We have to tax you. We have to tax you. The capital gains tax of 430, and they took it to court, and they won the case in the Ugandan courts. And Heritage Oil ran to London. It ran to a British court, and Uganda went to Britain and won the case also over there. So shares in Heritage Oil fell as much as 11%. So you can see that these companies are listed on these stock exchanges using Africa's resources. So what is the conclusion in all this? And of course, we have seen other problems. We have seen other problems. Problems like the stealing of oil from Nigeria. We saw a report which came out that the amount of oil actually that is being stolen from Nigeria illegally is around 140 million barrels per day. This is the same production almost like Ghana as a country that is producing. So this is how much is being stolen from Nigeria every day. And the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited, or the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, came out and discovered a pipeline which was connected to Shell's terminal, okay? A terminal which is operated by Shell, and this pipeline was pumping free oil for a very long time, for almost close to 10 years. That is what they claimed. That is what the Nigerian National Petroleum Company claimed. And this case, the fact that the pipeline was connected to Shell's terminal, a terminal which was controlled by Shell, which was operated by Shell, because it was connected to that terminal, this news disappeared in oblivion. It disappeared like that. Why? It is because it is Shell. Shell can be allowed to steal anyhow they want from the African people. These corporations can be allowed to steal and take it and enrich the West, enrich the United States, enrich Britain, and then finance their intellectuals, and the intellectuals can call this a resource curse, an oil curse. Call it a resource curse. And Financial Times can publish videos on YouTube and their platforms and call this a resource curse. When will Africa come out from the resource curse? And when Dangote builds a refinery, they are fighting him. They are now dropping down the prices of oil, so that the West, after Dangote has bought huge, barrels of oil, many barrels of oil, and is producing refined oil at an expensive price, they are now fighting him so that he cannot sell in the local market. They have dropped down the prices of crude so that the West now can manufacture cheap refined oil and pump it in the Nigerian market, and Dangote's oil will be more expensive. This is what they are doing, and they are working in concert with all their institutions. We have seen Bloomberg, Reuters, all of them attacking Dangote. We have seen them. We have seen NGOs themselves attacking Dangote. They are working in concert. What does this mean? Africans have to understand that the enemy of the African people, the perpetual enemy, the declared enemy of the African people, the inherent enemy of the African people is imperialism, and is Western imperialism. It's not corruption. It's not resource curse. The resource curse is part of the imperialism, imperialistic tactics to steal from the African people. So it should not be mistaken for any resource curse. There is no such thing as resource curse. There is imperialistic curse. Okay? And we need to understand what is at play here and fight back and push a different narrative. Of course, this channel is for the African narrative, and that's what we are here for. So we want you to support the channel. Please support the platform, and also support us in PayPal. Send us some super chat so that we can continue to do service for our people, for our continent, going forward. So Nkrumah mentioned, and the solution, we all know it. The solution is to work for a unified African state. If we cannot work for a unified African state, then we are going to be in a whole lot of trouble. We are going to be insulted with the racist remarks for a very long time, as they are doing, okay, and calling it a resource curse, because basically a resource curse means that Africans cannot manage their affairs. They are not intelligent enough to manage their resources. So it is a resource curse. They are cursed. But I don't want to mention that it's an imperialistic curse we have put on you. And we are maintaining it because we don't want to reform the international system which was created in 1945. And Nkrumah prescribed, and he warned on us. Nkrumah warned us that this system, it is too complicated for newly independent African states to deal with it. If we don't unify into a single state as Africans. So that is the solution for today, and that's the solution that we are supposed to work, towards. Imperialism at the top, and its collaborators on the African continent. These are the obstacles to Africa's development, and we have to remove these obstacles and unify the continent before we can start its reconstruction. My name is Kwame Gonza, and the channel is called Connect Africa and Africa Reimagined. Please like the channel and support us, and share it with other people. Subscribe if you are new to the channel. Please do not go without subscribing to the channel. We ask you to subscribe to the platform and share it with others. Support us in our PayPal account and support us with the super chat. We see you in the comment section. We see you in the chats. Continue to chat. Continue to subscribe. Continue to support the platform and share it with others so that it can grow and we can continue to serve the continent with all that we have. Thank you so much. And my name once again is Kwame Gonza, and the platform is called Africa Reimagined and Connect Africa. See you next time. Blessings.